And we are back here on Open, the HB 481 Heartbeat Bill, the status of marijuana legalization in New York City, new gun laws in New York State, and texting while crossing. Joining us now to discuss these and more. These are things making headlines. David Lesch is our attorney, host of today's verdict. I should say our attorney, but our legal correspondent.
I'm here for you.
Yeah, he's my attorney too. When I
pretty much
right.
am.
And
everybody else here too.
It's
good to be back. It's like coming back home when I come here. It's always a good feeling.
It's great.
Listen, it's a good time to be, certainly to be a Democrat in New York. A lot of laws have come down, certainly since January 2019. But before we get to some of the local laws, let's really get to the national, the big one, and that's Georgia that just criminalized abortion. And this is really an interesting law from a legal standpoint in terms of the ramifications. And I'll go through and I'll tell you why I find this very, very interesting. Okay. As you had said earlier, it's called the HB 481 bill, now signed into law, that prohibits doctors from terminating any pregnancy after they detect a embryonic or fetal cardiac activity. And what that means is, once a doctor can detect a fetal heartbeat, which is somewhere around 6 weeks, and this is the important part, that it then declares the unborn children is now a class of living, distinct person. And think about what this means. What this means is at 6 weeks, they've created a class, similarly to a class of individuals who are under 18, a class of individuals who are disabled. It's an actual legal class. Now, the ramifications are, well, do we include the unborn after 6 weeks as part of a census in Georgia? In terms of representation and people. What would happen if a woman is pregnant and she's incarcerated? Is that child now illegally being held in a prison? Now you might say, well, it's in a mother's stomach, but the mother's in prison, child's in prison. I mean, think about it. That is a class. You would have rights. Literally have legal rights if you declared a class. And after 6 weeks, you're declared a class. Then it gets even more interesting in terms of the punishment that would follow if the pregnancy was terminated after 6 weeks.
Because you got the doctor who will also face it.
Well, this is really what's fascinating. You have a couple of different legal ramifications. First of all, there's a particular drug that women can take. It's called misoprostol. It's a drug that helps with some stomach issues, but it does create an abortion. And certainly, if a woman took this, and this happened 6 weeks or 6.5 weeks, under Georgia law, the mother would be committing murder. Because the killing of a human being is murder in any state. And in Georgia, if you're making a 6-week fetus into, as the law would say, a class of living, distinct person, and you're taking a drug, purposely aborting a child at 6.5 weeks, you're committing murder. So that's the first legal ramification. Now, let's say the doctor does it in Georgia at 6.5 weeks, and you, as the mother, know he's doing it. Well, you're not necessarily committing murder, but you're a party to a murder. That's another separate, distinct felony that you would be charged with if this was actually enforced. Now, let's say you take illegal drugs, 6.5 weeks, and the fetus dies. Well, that's another felony. I mean, that's maybe manslaughter, but that's a felony.
So do we see this going upwards in terms of Supreme Court action?
It's going. It's not only that, because you have to remember, if you don't want to have an abortion in Georgia, but you are a Georgia resident, and then you say, well, you know what, I'm going to leave and go to another state and have an abortion where it's legal. Well, Georgia can say, well, that's a conspiracy to commit murder. So all these legal ramifications have to go to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court can can decide whether this is true, whether the unborn child is a class of living distinct people or person. And if they necessarily do feel this way, the majority of the Supreme Court, then they would be overthrowing Roe v. Wade.
Let me move a little
And
bit.
that- right.
Let me move because I got to get to New York too. I want to
Okay.
talk about this too. New York marijuana legalization
All right.
possibly could make it.
Okay,
through.
let's get to some New York stuff
Okay.
now, which is which is really home base here. Again, it's always about money. It always comes down to money, no matter what you say in terms of in terms of legalization, not legalization, certain things, and many times it comes down to money. And what it seems to be holding back New York in terms of being the next state that actually legalizes marijuana is where is the tax on the marijuana going to go? Some politicians think it should go to the neighborhoods that have been targeted the most by law enforcement because of illegal drugs. Well, let's get the money to certain parts of New York where the police are always there and cracking down on the houses for selling drugs. Let's get the money to those neighborhoods to prevent any illegal drug use. But then someone says, no, but we need it for the subways. Let's take the money that's taxed on, that if you're going to tax marijuana, we're going to sell it, but we're going to tax on it like cigarettes or alcohol. Let's use that for the subways. The MTA wants a piece. So the reason it has to become legal is they can't figure out where the money would possibly go to. All the politicians want it for their own self-interests. I think the legalization of marijuana is inevitable. My only personal issue with it is I seem to be walking around parks in New York and I'm smelling it constantly. I'm not quite sure what they're going to do in terms of preventing secondhand smoke. And I'm sure a lot of people just smell it all around the city. It's just because people are just smoking it, not because no one's cracking down on it anyway.
Right.
You really don't. You don't seem to be arrested for it. So that's something that's going to have to.
And walk me through the other component, because while you talk about the legalization of marijuana, there's also the decriminalization that comes with it as well.
Well, you know what? That's really what it comes down to. This is a low-level crime, and and I'm relating it to the texting when walking across the street,
Right.
Bill, which we're going to be eventually talking about, is do you want our resources, our legal resources, to go to cracking down on things like this? When there's so many more important things we need law enforcement. Do we really need law enforcement to arrest you or somebody because you're smoking marijuana? What harm are you really doing? To take you and to give you a ticket and to book you and to put you through the judicial system? What a waste of time. What a waste of money. And that turns out to be, segueing into a texting bill which says if you're walking across the street, and not necessarily texting, but looking at your phone as you're crossing the street, there's legislation that's trying to be put through Albany that's going to make it illegal. $25, $50 fine the first time, I think $250 the second time. And someone says, well, why are you wasting your time? You're going to have police officers or traffic agents give you a ticket for that? It takes up too much time. Let them, manage the intersections. That's more important than something like this. Well, so that's what ends up happening with some of these laws in terms of legalizing marijuana or texting. It's like, are we really, are we going to make it so that people throughout our city are going to be bothered for something when we really need the resources to go somewhere else? So I think that's very important. The last thing I want to get to before I go, I don't have much time, is the gun control in New York. That's been the biggest thing that's happened since 2019. And we have pushed through many laws that regulate your right in terms of using any type of hand pistols or any type of guns. And it's mostly in the schools. And that's because Trump had really come out and said, we should arm our teachers. Well, we don't want to arm teachers. So it's very, very important that you understand if you're going to buy a gun or you're going to use a gun, understand the laws, because if you're caught with any type of firearm, it's a mandatory 1-year sentence in prison. So we got so much to cover. I definitely will come back.
Right. So we'll break some of this down, but definitely more information on the heartbeat bill, marijuana legalization in New York City. Of course, stay tuned to us here on Open. We'll continue to break that down for you, as well as the texting while walking. These are things that could be making their way to our streets, literally. And yes, we'll have to make sure that we stay on top of that. Dave,
You got it.
as always, good to have you, brother.
It's a pleasure.
All righty. Now listen, if you do need some answers for some different legal issues. David's got you covered. You can connect with him, of course, on Facebook and Twitter at Today's Verdict. And you can always tune in at Today's Verdict. That's Tuesdays at 7 p.m. here on Bronx Net Television. Taking a quick break. We've got more show coming up right after this.